Hi, I'm Dyer Fry. I'm the editor at the Oklahoman. We are here in our new offices, and this is one of my first conversations. People that I want to bring in, visit about things, talk about what's going on in our community. So today I have with me two gentlemen from Oklahoma Watch, Scott Carter.
Scott Carter.
I'm Clifton Adcock with Oklahoma Watch.
And then I have Kris Steele here, who is the executive director of TEEM.
That's correct.
Okay. Recently, Oklahoma Watch did a series, and we ran it it kicked off a couple of weeks ago in the Oklahoman, and then we just had another installation Sunday, and then it'll wrap up next week. But they're focusing on the high cost of fees that are facing inmates when they get out of prison. They uncovered a lot of really interesting things, and it really shows you how almost insurmountable it is for people to get back on their feet. So, Scott, I'm going to kick off with you. When you started to grasp this story, did you have any idea that it was that exorbitant and that high, that big a hurdle?
No, I got a tip from a friend who said you should really look into this and see what these people face. And we spent several months talking to people and gathering documents and things like that. And it just seemed every time you found one thing, it led to 5 other areas that you had to look at, and it just grew exponentially. It just became huge.
Right. How about you, Clifton? What's the wow thing for you that you just said, man, I did not know that?
I think the wow thing for me was tracing the evolution of some of these fees. You can see, especially starting in the late 80s, early 90s, the number of fees just grow and grow and grow. I believe it was in 92, there were around 23 fees on the court fee schedule. Now, if you look at it, there's 63. So it's just compounded from that time period.
Right, right. Kris, you've been on the front lines. Give me a ballpark figure of what somebody might face in terms of fees. Give us a dollar amount.
Well, it ranges significantly, but it's not uncommon for an individual impacted by incarceration, once they've paid their debt and served their time and finished their period of incarceration, to transition back into our community facing debt anywhere in the neighborhood of $15,000 all the way up to $92,000.
$92,000.
And the reality is, as Clifton mentioned, it's not just the fact that we've increased the number of fees and fines that we levy to a person who has been convicted of a crime, but we've also increased the amount of those fines over the course of time. And so in essence, what's happened is we're funding the majority of our criminal justice system on the backs of individuals who commit crime, and then we're not giving them any opportunity to actually work to pay back those fees and fines because of the stigma associated with a person that has a felony conviction.
Right. Even if somebody gets out of prison and they've got that felony conviction, I mean, to get a high enough paying job to pay off a debt like that, is that impossible? Close to impossible?
Kris can probably speak to that more, but the people we talked to were going in, when they did get a job and they managed to get their driver's license back, they were getting jobs that paid maybe $11, $12 an hour, but they were still looking at the price of what would be a brand new car, $30,000 or $40,000 in court fines and cost, and have to pay that back for years, just many years.
Right. How do they pay it back? Do they set up a payment schedule? I mean, how does that work?
Usually they do. It's whether it's $1,000 or $92,000. It's usually $50 a month they pay, somewhere in that area. Right. It can range. It can go, 100, 200, all the way down to 25. But usually it's these monthly installment payments.
Now, you guys found a huge jump in these fees over the years. What caused that? Where's that coming from?
If you go back and look at history and you go back and look at State Question 640, once State Question 640 passed, there wasn't any will within the legislature to address future tax increases. So it all shifted to fines and fees. And it became much easier. You didn't talk about taxes, you just raised fines and fees, and you tied that with an attitude that developed that we need to be harsh on criminals and tough on crime, and that's where the evolution began, is all in that era.
And it all all started adding up together. Is there any other segment of the population that is hit with fees, fines? Is there any place else you can think of? I mean, is it just a regular court cost? I mean, like if somebody gets a divorce, do they have more fines and fees and, well, not fines, but fees? I mean, do they have more, like, is it across the board? Or is it mostly with the
someone
those incarcerated?
who's getting a divorce might argue yes, but on average, no. The criminal side is where you see most of these fines and these, not fines, but these fees and assessments added on. And a lot of times those aren't for the court system itself. They go to different executive agencies, executive branch agencies, like the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, the Council on Law Enforcement Education and Training, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. Each one of those has an assessment that goes into almost every court case, and not only every court case, but every charge within that court case. So say someone's charged with 2 counts of drug possession, they'll get levied those fees twice on that.
Wow, that's pretty challenging. What kind of jobs are people able to get when they get out, Kris?
That's a great question, and we are working hard with our nonprofit to try to provide better career credentials for our participants, and also strengthening relationships with various employers within the greater Oklahoma City area to not only provide a job, but actually a career path for somebody that is in the process of rebuilding their life. And so primarily we're looking at retail, construction, some clerical work. We're hoping to get into some other areas such as healthcare and related industries, the oil and gas industry, as a way to try to actually showcase the talents and the gifts that exist within a person that is often overlooked within the job market. And we think it can be a win-win situation for both the employee and the employer. And ultimately, we feel like that if an individual is able to obtain gainful employment and become a tax producer rather than a tax consumer, that benefits all of us and actually improves the quality of life for everyone in the community.
So I guess also mandatory minimums have played into a large part of this.
Yeah, the 85% rule on sentencing, the 3 strikes and you're out, all those, they've added to the length of sentence, they've added to the cost of the incarceration, and it's just all stacked up. It just evolved that way.
Right, and then that's what brings us to today, where our prisons are overcrowded and, you know, more women incarcerated and things like that. So what are you hearing since your stories have been published and been online? What are you hearing?
We've heard a lot of people come out of the woodwork saying, oh my gosh, yeah, that's the same thing that my loved one had to face, or that's the same thing my dad or mom had to pay, and they're still paying on. So we've got a lot of response on that.
Well, and it hadn't just been, it's been from the families and friends of inmates. They have to pay big costs to communicate with them, or to provide them a little money to get stuff from the canteen.
Tell me a little more about the cost to communicate with them.
Well, if you're incarcerated, there's the phone calls are much more expensive, and up until just a couple of years ago, a 15-minute phone call would have cost anywhere from $17 to $20.
And where does that money go?
Most of it went to the phone vendors, some went to the state in a form of a commission. Oklahoma was getting some pretty good commissions off phone vendors. The FCC has pushed back against that. They launched an investigation in 2013, and they've put a cap on one and proposing some more changes. But those are drawing fire from lots of county jails, county officials, and from state DOC officials who don't want to lose that revenue stream. Right,
because their population is up, and they're trying to probably cover the cost of feeding the inmates, and so it's like one big snowball.
Exactly, that's a good way to describe it. Yeah. It really is.
To take it away would be to take away around $3 million a year, somewhere in that area, from the Department of Corrections. And we all know with the state budget the way it is right now, they're going to fight for every last dollar they can get. So You know, it's kind of a no-win situation for everyone involved.
And Kelly, if I may just add too, there's some pretty significant research that actually has been conducted with some super conservative think tanks that demonstrate that there is no direct connection between longer incarceration rates and reduction in crime rates. And as a matter of fact, the statistics show right the opposite. States that have longer mandatory minimum sentences actually have higher crime rates. And it's because the longer a person is incarcerated, the harder it's going to be for that person to successfully assimilate back into society, at least in part. That in conjunction with the need to address some of the root issues that may cause criminal behavior, such as addiction or mental illness, which is often neglected and not addressed, lack of education, lack of job training and life skills, things of that nature. I would just point out that the Department of Corrections, by definition, by its very name, indicates that once a person has paid their debt and served their time, something in their life should have been corrected. That's where the Department of Corrections comes into play. And without addressing some of those root issues, we're seeing just the opposite. Individuals are transitioning back into our community at even a greater risk to public safety than before they were incarcerated. And if you can imagine a person who is literally in the process of starting over and rebuilding their life, except now with about $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 worth of debt on top of all kinds of difficulties and challenges and overcoming a troubled past, it's pretty difficult. And then in addition to that, because the state has been unwilling or unable to adequately fund our courts and the criminal justice system, we've almost built a perverse incentive into the mix in literally funding our system on the backs of people who commit crime.
Right. Well, I know you worked a lot on the justice reinvestment, and I think it's gaining some traction again, maybe this year. And I don't know what the answers are, but thank you guys for digging into it and bringing it more attention to it, because if you shine a light on it, sometimes that can bring about change. So,
well, thanks for your interest too.
So thanks for coming in. We appreciate it.
Thanks for the discussion.
Okay.